Hello and welcome into another edition of Locked On Wolves. On today's episode, all about the crazy less than 24 hours, the Timberwolves dismissal of Gersson Rosas suddenly, what we know about that situation, what we don't know still, and what's next for the Wolves. That's all the show today. It's all about Gersson Rosas, what's next for the Wolves as we're less than 2 weeks away from the preseason opener, less than a week away from training camp. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm also the co-editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Welcome into the show. A reminder here off the top quickly that Thursdays on Locked On NBA, you can listen to the Locked On NBA pod with Jackson Gatlin and Matt Moore. They'll tell you whose NBA stock is up and who's down. Follow the Locked On NBA podcast today on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. Happy Thursday, everybody. This is a bit of an emergency podcast, recording this late on Wednesday following a crazy afternoon of news surrounding the Timberwolves. We were going to do a Friday show, bumped it up to Thursday, and who knows? If anything changes, we'll have a Friday show as well. But if you somehow missed the news, Gersson Rosas is out as the Timberwolves president of basketball operations. It was completely unexpected from a I guess you could say from a broad perspective. Of course, now there's tons of reports about some turmoil within the Timberwolves organization. We'll get into all that here in just a minute. But I think anybody would be kidding themselves if they suggested that they knew this was coming. Even folks who say that they know that things were going on behind the scenes, the timing is what's shocking everybody, certainly. So I want to get into all that, kind of what we know, how it went down, and then I want to get into what we don't know and what's next for the Wolves. This will be a pretty quick hitting reaction here. If you're not already following or subscribed to this podcast, reminder you can do so everywhere for free. You can listen to this to Locked On Wolves wherever you get podcasts. That, of course, includes Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. As always, we thank you for making us your first listen of the day. You can also follow on Twitter, of course, at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. And also a reminder, we are now on YouTube as well. This is week 4 of being on YouTube. So be sure to check that out. Subscribe on YouTube if possible. Okay, so here's what happened this afternoon or Wednesday afternoon, I guess, mid-afternoon-ish Central Time. I get a Slack message from somebody at Dunking with Wolves with a link to the Woj tweet. I didn't have my notifications on for Woj, which is, I guess, the first lesson to learn from this, but got a link to a Woj tweet. So the thought that pops into my head immediately is Simmons trade. And then I thought, well, I feel like I would have heard there would have been some sort of rumblings. It's probably not that. And then I thought, well, maybe Simmons is traded to somebody else. It's got to be that. So I click on the Woj tweet and see the Rosas dismissal news, and complete shock. As I'm sure it was for basically everybody that heard the news. I mean, and except for 2 or 3 beat reporters in the Twin Cities, nobody on an international, or I guess probably international, a national NBA landscape media level saw this coming. It was a complete shock. And so then, it's a couple, 3 hours of kind of peeling back the layers of what really happened here. The Timberwolves statement that they issued as an organization, it was Woj that reported it. And then Shams Charania and John Krasinski of The Athletic reported it as well, basically within a few minutes of Woj. And then the Timberwolves issued a statement from Glenn Taylor, basically saying, really literally just saying that Gersson Rosas had been dismissed. And that was it. There was no thanks to Gersson for his time with the team. We thank him for his contributions. It was a very, I guess you could call it a statement that implied that there was cause to this dismissal. This wasn't simply we're going to go in a different direction. There was more to it. And that was certainly reading between the lines, but it was obvious at that point. And then a little bit later, there was another statement from the Wolves. This is late afternoon now, Central Time, probably 4:30, 5 o'clock, where the Wolves said, they issued a statement saying that Sachin Gupta would be running the organization or running the basketball operations department. I think the way they said it is we'll assume basketball operations oversight. while retaining his current title. So not giving him the interim president of basketball operations title. They're leaving him the executive VP of basketball operations, but giving him the oversight of the department. Of course, Gupta was the number 2 for Gersson Rosas, prior to his dismissal. So that's kind of the order of events. And there was, of course, some rumors going around on Twitter, and I'm sure that many of you saw the rumors as they were going around. I won't get into the details because they weren't entirely, they certainly weren't sourced, and they were just kind of out there, and there were rumblings. And of course, there'd been here and there. I mean, local reporters had talked about just general discontent, but I think the tone was more that it wasn't kumbaya, right? It wasn't all happy-go-lucky, everybody with their arms around each other's shoulders and happy all the time type of a thing, which was kind of Gersson Rosas's thing, right? When he came in, it was all about family. It was all about, working together for a common goal, changing the culture, etc., doing all these things, some more gimmicky than others, and some legitimately, franchise changing. Some of the ways that they went about things within the franchise were different under Gersson Rosas than they had been certainly under Tom Thibodeau and under Flip Saunders, and different in many ways good and in some ways bad. And as we find out, a lot more ways bad than I think we knew it, for much of the past 2 years. So there's just kind of this overall sense of like, there must have been one thing that kind of made this happen. And there were some rather salacious rumors going around. And, I think the right thing to do is to withhold judgment until there's source reporting and we know a little bit more. And then sure enough, late Thursday, I guess, I don't know, mid-late, what time was it? It was like 8-9 o'clock, something like that, Central Time on Wednesday. We get the report from WCCO, the CBS affiliate in the Twin Cities, that that the Timberwolves dismissed him for poor performance or for performance-related reasons, including a toxic workplace culture and then also for an inappropriate relationship. There wasn't much else to that report. And just really less than an hour later, John Krasinski and Shams of The Athletic, and this is primarily John's reporting, I believe, that he's apparently been working on for weeks and weeks, came out a lengthy article at The Athletic that kind of details everything that we know. And I'll get into a couple of those high points here. I don't want to take his whole article. Of course, The Athletic's a subscription service, so check it out if you can. But I'll talk about some of the high points here that John mentioned. And I would say, 75% of the article at least is about some of the toxic workplace culture type things that have gone on within the Timberwolves organization. And then he gets into some of the more salacious accusations, the personal relationship, et cetera. Or I guess not accusations. I think at this point it's common knowledge that this event took place and it was part of the reason that he was dismissed. And so we'll get into that here in a second. It does sound like it was primarily performance related, but there were several factors that played into it. So I want to get into all that and then look at what happens next for the Wolves. But I just think the timing, obviously, 5 days before training camp, 12 days before the preseason opener, it's just shocking. And there's plenty of opinions out there like, hey, why couldn't this have happened a few months ago if the writing was on the wall? Well, to answer that, and I saw a couple of more prominent reporters nationally saying this, I mean, Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez didn't take over the team until late summer. It's not like they were in charge in May if some of these rumors are out there. And sure, there should have been red flags raised much sooner if this truly was a toxic workplace environment. Clearly, more should have been done sooner. It's not strictly because, hey, he did a bad job. Because, and this is a topic for another show, I don't think Gersson Rosas did a bad job in terms of the results of what he did. Now, the process, it sounds like, was not good, was the way he went about it and the way that people in the organization felt that they were treated, not positive. The results, strictly results, and I guess not actually strictly results, because I'm not talking win-loss. That obviously wasn't good. But where the roster sits today, I think is actually a really good place, and we can isolate individual moves, and he had more wins than losses over his 2+ years leading the team. But again, that's a topic for another show. Clearly the process and the way that people were treated within the organization was not where it should have been. And if that was the case and folks knew this, why wasn't something done sooner by, say, Glenn Taylor? Why wasn't something done sooner by, why wasn't maybe this did happen and Glenn didn't do what he needed to do, but why wasn't this passed to Glenn Taylor by a subordinate of Rosas like a Sachin Gupta or somebody else who might have had more clout? Scott Layden was there for a period of time. Remember, he was the bridge from the one guy who stuck around from the Tibbs administration to the Rosas regime. why didn't Scott Layden say something? And we don't know. And maybe some of these people did, and the buck stops with Glenn, and he didn't do anything about it. We don't know. That's speculation, but it is a fair question why not more was done sooner. And if it was a question of like, hey, let's let Lori and Rodriguez do their entry interviews with everybody and try and figure out what's going on in the organization, and they uncovered some of this stuff, then kudos to them for acting quickly. Kudos to Lori and Rodriguez for walking the walk. And, as far as we can tell, once they were privy to some of this information, Lori talked about transparency and trust. He's talked about it quite a bit over the past few weeks in the media. I talked about it in the show a couple times. Some interviews he gave where he talked about those being core values of the organization. And when some of this stuff came to light, really all of it, Lori had no choice but to I'm sure, advocate for this move. And a reminder that Lori and Rodriguez only own 20% of the team. I'm not sure there's complete understanding out there of this. This is still Glenn Taylor's team. He's the majority owner. He owns nearly 80% of the team at this point. I guess it's probably more like 65, 70% of the team, but he's still the majority owner. It's his call. No doubt Lori Rodriguez had major say in this though. And I don't think the timing from that sense is an accident at all, that it's just a few weeks after they began to get really involved. Okay. So what I want to do next is get into, get into the actual, I guess, the reasons for the firing laid out mostly by John Krasinski at The Athletic, and then also what happens next year for the Wolves. So we'll get into all that next. First, let's talk about our outstanding friends over at DirecTV. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone. You've got your neighbor's best friend's login for all the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part is that there's no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Let's also talk about Sleeper. Sleeper is an outstanding app for fantasy basketball. In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense and required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball, and it's called Game Pick. It's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more scheduled games to play in that week, those days are over. The days of mindlessly daily busy work are also over. The days of giving up halfway through the season because of said busy work also over. In Game Picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent's defensive ranking, pace of play, and more. All that adds up to more strategy and less of that dreaded busy work. If you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper cracked the fantasy basketball code. If you love playing fantasy football, like yours truly, and by the way, I play fantasy football. My dynasty league is on Sleeper. If you prefer building out a weekly strategy versus daily busy work, you're going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. All right, let's talk about John Krasinski's report on The Athletic and my take on, I guess, everything that went down within the Wolves front office that led to this dismissal of Rosas. So I guess the cliff notes are this. Basically, the Timberwolves front office, the dynamic within the front office was apparently the best way to say it in my words, not quite as perfect as Gersson Rosas would have you believe. That was at least the rumblings leading into this, right? Now, the WCCO story comes out and calls it a toxic workplace. Shortly thereafter, John and Shams at The Athletic go a little bit more in depth and talk about some more specifics. So one of the first specifics mentioned was the handling of Ryan Saunders' firing. And I guess you could talk about his hiring in the first place, whether that was to appease Glenn Taylor or whatever. That's, I guess, also another topic or a topic for another day. But Saunders firing, having him fly out to New York with the team, clearly it was planned. They wait till they lose to the Knicks and then fire Ryan Saunders on the road, send him back to Minnesota, hire Chris Finch without a real coaching search. And that's, of course, the Coaches Association was upset about that for obvious reasons. There wasn't the true search. There were no minority candidates interviewed for this role. And Rosas's reasoning was, hey, before we hired Ryan, We interviewed all these candidates. We have a really diverse front office. And for the most part, I think that placated people, certainly not the Coaches Association. But Chris Finch is also deserving to be a head coach. The timing was just very strange, and the way that it was handled, especially on the firing of Saunders' side. And then also the longtime European scout, Zarko Durasic, I believe is his name. And now I lost it. I had it in front of me. But the way that he was unceremoniously like, oh, he'd been with the team forever. Yeah, it is. Zarko Durasic had been with the team forever. I mean, like pre, I think Saunders' first go round 20 plus years ago. He's a longtime European scout, and he was let go kind of unceremoniously over the past year. The way that was handled ruffled some feathers. And then beyond that, it's some of the stuff you hear. I guess your I don't know, this sounds bad, but prototypical toxic workplace that you hear about, right? So overworked long hours, the input not really being taken into account. Rosas talked about inclusivity and listening and people being able to raise their hands and give their opinions. And he listened, but did he really listen is kind of the gist of this article. But he would kind of go off and make his own decision, which of course, ultimately the president of basketball operations has to make these decisions. But if he really wanted to foster this collaborative environment, it certainly sounds like that's not how the people underneath Rosas felt that they were being treated. That didn't come through. And of course, as I mentioned off the top of the show, this just doesn't jive with Rosas's family, I guess mantra that he had the whole time he's been in Minnesota, talking about family and culture, et cetera. And there's been some weird indications here and there, just from a personnel perspective, how things were being handled, that things were a little bit off. And now we see some of these other more serious complaints about the toxic workplace environment. And then towards the end of the article, it gets into I'll call it salacious, the accusation or the I guess the report now. It says multiple sources confirmed this with The Athletic, according to John Krasinski. The organization discovered, and he says in recent days, I know there were some rumors on Twitter that this had been known prior, but we have to go off what we've seen from sourced reports. The organization discovered that Rosas, who was married, had a consensual, intimate relationship with a member of the organization. It made several people within the organization uncomfortable. Sources said, well, this was not the reason for his dismissal. It certainly impacted the timing. And then there's the big quote that John has in his piece at The Athletic is, this decision was made for performance reasons, one high-ranking Timberwolves source said. So the alleged consensual relationship, or I should say the consensual relationship that is alleged to have happened, clearly was the final straw. And that's going to grab the headlines. The reason that's being given by the organization is the toxic workplace environment, performance reasons. And I mean, if they need to point at a win-loss record, they could, but obviously there's plenty of other factors, to be fair to Rosas and his record, literally. Two COVID-19 pandemic shortened seasons, Towns' only injuries in his career, D'Angelo Russell's injuries, et cetera. There's lots of reasons why the Wolves haven't been good the last couple of years. And the talent on the roster is actually quite good as we sit here today. But performance reasons, that includes the handling of the management of people, right? The organization as a whole. And if people are leaving the organization, and I'm not suggesting that this is that there's a direct correlation here, but Joseph Blair recently left. It was a clear step up for him, I guess, with the Wizards, but he'd gotten a promotion, left for a different promotion shortly, right as Summer League was starting. We saw Sachin Gupta interview and be a finalist for the Sacramento Kings head job. And that was another thing. I somehow missed that a minute ago. That was a big piece of this article at The Athletic, is that Gupta was blocked to go to Houston and take essentially a lateral move in terms of title and role, but a pay increase. And Rosas apparently blocked Gupta. This was midsummer, right before the draft, and cited basically that Gupta would have all the proprietary information on the Timberwolves before going and working for the Rockets. Now, of course, the Wolves didn't have any picks. I understand that from the perspective of, I mean, yeah, the timing would not be great, right? You wouldn't want somebody from your front office to go to a competing front office right as the draft is starting. I get that, but it certainly sounds like it was not handled correctly. And Rosas had supported Gupta trying to get the job with Sacramento previously, But then it sounds like there was at least one other instance mixed in there somewhere too, where a similar situation happened where Rosas blocked the move from Gupta. And then there was another mention in here that at one point Rosas had blocked, or had basically kicked him out of the facility and said you're barred from the facility for this period of time. Like there's just kind of this. The past like 3 months sound like they've really spiraled based on this report and the WCCO report. And I mean, if this stuff is all true and it's all sourced and we have no reason to believe that it isn't, then yes, then Gersson Rosas, it makes sense why they dismissed him. It's the timing, it's the overall dysfunction of the organization that's most concerning. And, to an outsider, to somebody who's just casually follows the NBA and the Timberwolves, this looks really ugly. And I would say it's about as ugly as it could be. I mean, all of that criticism is warranted. And of course, the common denominator here is Glenn Taylor's been the owner for however many 25-ish years almost at this point. And so that's the easiest place to point the finger. It's just unbelievable that it doesn't really matter who gets brought in, but there's something that tanks that really kind of, I guess, torpedoes is a better word, torpedoes the organization's efforts. They can't get out of their own way. This is actually a really exciting season going into it. I mean, you got the number 1 overall pick from last year. You've got Towns healthy, D'Angelo Russell healthy, a chance of trading for Ben Simmons, Jaden McDaniels, up and coming. They've got, a truly deep roster, like the top 10 guys are legit rotation guys on a playoff team. And then this happens right before training camp, 12 days before the preseason opener, less than a month before the regular season opener. It's just, you cannot make this up. Okay. Next, I want to hit on what's next. I want to hit on Gupta briefly, running the organization and kind of put a bow on, I guess, what we know so far. And who knows how much is going to change by the time you listen to this and, by Friday. So we're going to do all that still here on the show today, and then we'll wrap up. First, so let's talk about our great friends over at Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar of all time. It tastes exactly like a candy bar. I kid you not. And cookie dough chunk is available now for a limited time, and I mean really limited time because it's delicious. I've already ordered a box myself, and they're going to go extremely fast. So again, if you're a protein bar person and haven't tried Built Bar, please do. If you're not a protein bar person, get into it with Built Bar. You can get a mix box right now. You get 2 of each of the 9 main flavors. But again, if you can get cookie dough chunk, that's my number 1 recommendation for sure. Check out the macros in Built Bar: 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from only 130 calories per bar to just 180 calories per bar, only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and just 4 to 5 grams net carbs. They're all amazing flavors. They're all delicious and healthy for you. Built Bar is also the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team. You can go to built.com and use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your order. All right, let's also talk about betonline.ag. We're back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back on to start another football season. As always, BetOnline is your number 1 spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With the new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, betonline.ag continues to be the number 1 source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100. From football, basketball, boxing, right on down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline is your online sportsbook experts. A reminder, that's promo code NFL100 for a 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Again, BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Okay, let's try and put a bow on the crazy day that was in Timberwolves land. So Sachin Gupta now takes over and is managing the basketball operations department. Of course, he's been a well-thought-of executive for many years. He was with Gersson Rosas in Houston and Daryl Morey in Houston for a long time. He was briefly with the Sixers, pre-Daryl Morey, of course, briefly with the Sixers, and then I think 1 season with the Detroit Pistons before the Wolves hired him before last season. And he was a finalist for the Kings' top job that he didn't get, but reportedly Rosas was supportive of that endeavor of him trying to get a top job with Sacramento. He's back in Minnesota. He had wanted to leave a lateral-ish move to Houston over the past year. Some other jobs were potentially on the table for him. There's a really good chance he ends up getting the job. Now, there were a couple of quick rumors right after the Rosas dismissal that were out there. Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report immediately said that the Timberwolves, or that I should say that Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry are thought to be big fans of Elton Brand, who of course is still in Philadelphia. He was their GM, and now he's kind of more of a figurehead type. That's the role he's holding now under Daryl Morey in Philadelphia, that the Wolves were interested in him, or that Rodriguez and Lowry like him. That's the name that has already surfaced as somebody the Wolves that have interest in. Of course, there's former Calvin Booth is somebody who's always a finalist for president of basketball operations jobs and formerly was a Timberwolves player, briefly a coach and in their front office as well. It's another name we'll probably see again. But honestly, Sashi Gupta's, I mean, he's probably, if you kind of survey the national media types, he's probably a top 5, candidate league wide in terms of somebody to lead a front office. So it would seem a little silly to me for Lowry and Rodriguez to do this and then not be able to get out of their own way by looking elsewhere. And then because Gupta then eventually would leave as well. And by all accounts, I mean, so much of what the Wolves have done, Gupta was the right-hand man, right? So he's obviously involved in all this stuff with Rosas and was clearly involved in the Chris Finch hire. And I would imagine there's no indication that Chris Finch, his job would be in danger at all, which would be ridiculous. He was fantastic over the final few weeks of last season. So if Gupta stays on and Finch stays on, and the day-to-day itself, other than the weird, I guess the weird feel around the organization, and weird is probably really the tamest of words to describe it. It could be business as usual for the players if they can somehow block this out. Of course, media day is Monday, so you feel for the players trying to come in and just do their job and now have to deal with this. But in theory, the day-to-day shouldn't change that much outside of the Ben Simmons trade thing, which I haven't even touched on the potential of that being impacted, or what potential impact this Rosas firing has to do with the Simmons situation. That's, I think, a hard thing to figure out at this point. But, I mean, no draft, no free agency right now, trade deadlines months out. So I guess from the perspective of, hey, if you want to get somebody, get their feet wet in the role, even though it's the start of the season, it's tumultuous for the rest of the organization, for the marketing and PR folks and communications folks. I guess this makes some sense, and that there's at least some time for Gupta and whoever he brings in to be more acclimated. Gupta's obviously already acclimated to the organization and everything, but we'll see what happens. Also notable, I should have mentioned this sooner, but Gupta is the first person of Indian origin to lead an NBA front office, and he's officially doing that. Granted, on an interim basis, and he doesn't have the title president of basketball operations. I really hope that's where we end up with this thing, unless there's like a top flight executive that's ready to leave a great situation to come to Minnesota and prove they could win, a la like Theo Epstein did in baseball, right? Like that would be great. I don't think that's likely. I think Gupta is a great option. I think they should give him the job. So anyway, he's leading the way on a day-to-day basis. Once the players get on the court next Monday, they should be able to lock in. Chris Finch should be able to get his guys to lock in. It's a completely different, once you're in season, some of this other stuff can hopefully go to the side, right? And maybe that's completely wishful thinking. I'm not naive enough to think that there's not going to be some sort of like kind of pall hanging over training camp, this weird feel. I'm sure that that's going to be the case to some extent. But from a practical standpoint, besides the fact it's terrible optics, which sounds crazy to say, but it is. It's terrible optics. Everything about the Rosas situation. Perhaps it's a good clean break. Perhaps Lowry and Rodriguez have a decent handle on what they're doing now from a personnel perspective, and what they need to do to continue to transform the culture of the organization, the franchise that they're in the process of purchasing. But we don't know. We're not going to have any idea. And these players are going to have to deal with it at media day on Monday. They're going to get asked about it plenty, I'm sure. And we are not going to, real basketballs, or I guess real-ish preseason basketball is 12 days out. We'll see how this impacts them. And that's a huge question mark. Okay. That's all we have for today. If you're not already following or subscribed to the podcast, please do so anywhere you listen. Again, thank you for allowing us to be your first listen of the day. Here in the Locked On Network. Remember, Locked On is free and available on all platforms for all your favorite teams. That includes YouTube. And Locked On Wolves is, of course, also on Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN, as you can see right below me here on the graphic. And yeah, again, all platforms. And we'll talk. I'll have a Friday show. If anything breaks, we'll do a Friday show. If not, we'll be back Monday. And then next week, we're daily Monday through Friday once again, as we gear up for, not gear up for training camp. That is training camp next week, but we gear up for actual basketball here in the next couple of weeks. Otherwise, thanks for listening to the show. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A quick reminder about Locked On Bets. I already talked about betonline.ag, but betting on the NBA or any other sport does not have to be a guessing game if you listen to the Locked On Bets podcast. Of course, it's hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day. Follow the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by betonline.ag, wherever you get podcasts. All right, that's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.